The storm announced itself by changing the taste of the air. By noon, the wind above the Mogollon Rim had gone still, and the silence made Caleb Ward uneasy. No grasshopper clicked beneath the porch. No jay scolded from the cedar posts. Even the 3 horses in the south corral stood with their heads raised, listening toward the west. Caleb set the heel of his boot against a loose porch board and pressed. The nails squealed but held. He had meant to replace half the planks before summer, then the pump handle split, one mare threw a shoe, and the roof over the feed room began leaking dust whenever the wind rose. A man alone learned to rank trouble. The trouble that would kill something came first. The rest waited. He shaded his eyes. Beyond the greasewood and the black ribs of volcanic rock, a wall of red-brown haze had covered the far mesas. It did not move like rain. It rolled low and broad, swallowing the land without hurry. "Come on, then," he muttered. The words sounded strange after a day without speech. He crossed the yard with a coil of rope over one shoulder. Heat came through the soles of his boots. The packed dirt had cracked around the water trough, and the trough itself was down to a dark strip where 3 horse noses had stirred mud from the bottom. Caleb opened the shed, lifted 2 sloshing buckets, and poured them in. The smell of warm iron and algae rose into his face. The horses drank. Caleb ran his palm down the neck of the gray gelding buck, feeling the muscles twitch beneath the sweat-darkened hair. "You'll have shade soon enough." Buck breathed against his sleeve, unconvinced. Caleb latched the stable doors, tied the shutters, and dragged a canvas over the wagon bed. He carried the empty beehive box inside before the wind could scatter it. At the chicken coop, he found one hen sitting in the dust with her beak open. He tucked her under his arm and put her into the low stone pantry with the others. Their feathers smelled of sun and dry straw. They complained until he shut the door. The first gust reached the ranch as he turned toward the north fence. It came hot and hard, bending the rabbit brush flat and lifting a sheet of grit across the yard. Caleb pulled his hat low. The western sky had darkened to the color of an old bruise. Near the wash stood the failed well. He had built it 9 years earlier, when he still believed labor could force the land to answer. He had hauled river stone from a canyon 2 miles away, mixed lime in a washtub, and lowered himself by rope while Ruth worked the windlass above. 42 feet down they found hard clay and then shale. Nothing wet, not even a seam dark enough to encourage a fool. After Ruth and Emily died, Caleb stopped looking for water. The well remained open because covering it felt too much like sealing a grave. Now the wind drove a tumbleweed against the stones. It broke apart with a dry rattle. Caleb went to drag the timber lid into place. He had one hand on the iron ring when he heard the scraping. He froze. It came again from below, 3 quick scratches, a pause, then a weak bump. Caleb set the lid aside and knelt at the rim. Dust spun down the shaft. At first he saw only darkness and the pale curve of stone. Then something moved against the wall. 2 eyes caught the light. They belonged to a child. She was wedged on a narrow ledge where part of the lining had collapsed, one bare foot pressed against the opposite wall. Her dress was not a dress at all, but a long torn shirt over a buckskin skirt. One sleeve hung in strips. Her black hair had dried in ropes across her face. Dust covered her so completely that only the eyes seemed alive. Caleb's hand tightened on the rim. The girl watched him without blinking. She held a sliver of rock in one fist. It was sharp enough to cut skin if a hand came too close. "How long have you been down there?" he asked. The wind carried his words away. She showed no sign of understanding. Caleb looked toward the trail. The nearest army road lay 12 miles south, but riders sometimes cut across his land on the way to Fort Apache. Prospectors came farther north than they admitted, following rumors of copper, timber, or water. In the settlements, a lone Apache child would not be treated as lost. She would be called escaped, stolen, dangerous, useful, or any other word that allowed a grown man to put a rope around her. The dust wall had reached the western pasture. It swallowed the fence posts one after another. Caleb took the canteen from his belt, less than half full. He lowered it by the strap until it rested on the ledge. The girl did not move. He backed away from the rim, turned, and walked 10 paces. When he looked over his shoulder, the canteen had vanished into the dark. A sound came from the trail then, faint hoofbeats perhaps, or only loose boards knocking in the wind. Caleb could not tell. He returned to the well and slid the timber lid across the opening, leaving a gap no wider than his hand on the leeward side. He kicked dust over the drag marks and scattered 2 broken branches near the stones. "If you understand me," he said into the gap, "stay quiet." The storm struck before he reached the porch. It took the afternoon apart. The barn disappeared behind moving red dust. Pebbles rattled against the shutters like thrown grain. Caleb pushed a rag under the front door and lit a lamp, though it was not yet 3 o'clock. Dust found its way inside anyway. It sifted from the rafters, lined the plates on the shelf, and gritted between his teeth. He sat at the kitchen table with his rifle close enough to touch. The canteen had held enough water for a day if the girl drank slowly. She had no food that he had seen, no blanket. The ledge would protect her from the worst of the wind, but the temperature would fall after sunset. He pictured her fingers around that piece of stone. On the wall above the stove hung Ruth's blue enamel cup. He had left it there because moving it would create a clean circle in the soot, and he did not want to see how long she had been gone measured in dust. Caleb got up. He poured goat milk into a wooden bowl, cut a heel from yesterday's bread, and spread the last spoonful of honey over it. The honey had gone grainy in the jar. Emily used to scrape it with her teeth and grin when Ruth told her to mind her manners. He wrapped the bread in cloth and waited. The wind weakened after dark, not suddenly but in long, tired breaths. By 10, the rafters had stopped groaning. Caleb opened the door. The ranch had become a different place. Dust lay knee-deep against the north side of the barn. The moon shone through a pale copper haze. Every sound was muffled. He carried the bowl and bread to the well. The timber lid had not moved. Caleb crouched and slid the food through the gap. He heard the girl's breathing quick and shallow. "My name is Caleb," he said. "I'm going to sit over there. You can eat or not." He moved to a flat stone 6 yards away and sat with his back to her. The rifle rested across his thighs. He watched moonlight gather on the corral rails. 10 minutes passed. Then wood scraped softly behind him. Caleb kept his eyes forward. A small sound followed, the sound of someone drinking too fast and trying not to make noise. The bowl bumped stone. She stopped. Caleb did not turn. After a while, the drinking resumed, slower this time. He stayed until the night became cold enough to stiffen his fingers. Before leaving, he placed an old wool blanket beside the opening. He did not tell her it had belonged to his daughter. In the morning, the bowl sat beneath the gap, licked clean. The cloth was folded on top of it. Beside the bowl lay a polished stone, gray-green and smooth as soap. Caleb picked it up. There was no running water within miles of his ranch. He closed his fist around the stone and felt, for the first time in years, the shape of an obligation that had nothing to do with debt, fences, or winter feed. The storm had erased every track. It had also driven travelers toward any roof they could find. Caleb spent the first hour after sunrise checking the ranch. One shutter had torn loose. A section of fence lay flat under a drift. The canvas over the wagon was gone. He found it snagged in a juniper half a mile east, flapping like a blue flag. He worked without breakfast. He reset the shutter hinge, shoveled dust from the stable threshold, and carried water to the horses 1 bucket at a time. Each trip took him past the well. He never looked directly at it. At mid-morning, he heard the girl cough. The sound was so faint he might have mistaken it for a quail if he had not been waiting for it. Caleb went inside and stood at the cupboard. He owned 2 medicines, a jar of salve that smelled of pine pitch and a paper packet of quinine left from the fever years ago. The quinine had yellowed and clumped. He did not know if it would help or harm a half-starved child. He chose warm water, a pinch of salt, and a little more milk. When he brought them, the girl had moved close enough to the gap that he could see one eye and the bridge of her nose. "You're sick?" No answer. He held up the cup, drank from it, then set it inside. The eye watched him. Caleb pointed to his chest. "Caleb." The girl's gaze shifted to his mouth. He repeated the name. A long time passed before she touched her own chest. "Naya," she whispered. Her voice was rough from thirst. "Naya," Caleb said. She flinched at the sound of her name from him, but did not retreat. Caleb nodded once and backed away. The name followed him through the rest of his chores. At noon he repaired the north fence. The hammer rose and fell. Cedar scent came from each fresh split in the posts. Sweat ran into his eyes and left salt on his lips. He thought of Naya below the ground, listening to the blows. He remembered another fence, another summer. Emily had been 7 and furious because a calf had stepped on her boot. She sat on a post while Caleb stretched wire, declaring that cattle were foolish creatures and horses had better judgment. Ruth had laughed from the wagon. The sound carried over the field, clean and bright. That autumn the fever came. The settlement closed its school, then its church. Men who had shared Caleb's coffee barred their doors when he rode into town for medicine. He stood on the boardwalk with snow melting down his collar and heard voices behind the mercantile wall. He had silver. He had begged. Nobody opened. By the time he reached home, Emily no longer knew him. Ruth died 2 days later. Caleb had spent the next 9 years telling himself that he had chosen the rim because he preferred silence. The truth was less dignified. He had come where no one could refuse him again because he would never ask. The hammer slipped and struck his thumb. He swore dropped it and pressed the bleeding nail against his shirt. From the direction of the well came one soft scrape. Naya was listening. "I'm fine," he called, though he did not know whether she understood. The ridiculousness of explaining himself to a child hidden in a dry well almost made him laugh. The sound rose in his throat and died there from disuse. Late in the afternoon, he took her beans mashed with lard, 2 strips of dried venison and water. The food vanished. In its place, when he returned after sunset, he found the tiny skull of a wren set carefully on the rim. Caleb placed it beside the polished stone on his kitchen table. 2 gifts, not payment exactly, something closer to balance. He began to understand that Naya did not want to be treated as a creature in a trap. She could not climb out, and she could not risk being seen, but she could decide what passed between them. She had kept enough of herself to answer kindness with choice. The next morning, he fashioned a ladder from 2 pine poles and rawhide rungs. He carried it behind the barn and tested each knot. He told himself it was for later. If riders came, the well remained the safest place. If no one came by night, he would bring her into the root cellar, where it was cooler and there was a cot. He was tightening the last rung when Buck snorted in the corral. Caleb looked south. 2 riders approached through the heat shimmer. They rode hard for men who claimed to be searching. Their horses' chests were dark with sweat, and foam clung to the bits. The first rider wore a pale duster and a cream hat too fine for the trail. The second was larger, hunched forward in the saddle, with a red beard and a revolver tied low on his thigh. Caleb recognized the man in the duster. Harlan Vale had bought half the failing claims around Pine Creek after a drought drove the owners into debt. He called himself a land agent. Others called him worse when he was not close enough to hear. He held contracts for timber, freight, and 2 wells near the Army Road. Water was the business that made him rich. He sold it by the barrel to ranchers whose springs had somehow silted up soon after he arrived. Vale raised one gloved hand as if greeting an employee. "Ward." Caleb leaned the ladder against the barn and walked to the gate. "Vale." The red-bearded man looked past him at the buildings. His gaze paused on the well. Valeful smiled. "Storm treated you gently. It took my canvas. A tragedy. I'm sure the territory will mourn." Caleb said nothing. Vale's smile thinned. He was in his early 50s, narrow through the shoulders, with a handsome face made unpleasant by constant appraisal. He looked at a person the way a butcher looked at a hanging side of beef, deciding where the useful cuts ended. "This is Rafe Pike," Vale said. "He's helping me locate some missing people." Pike spat into the dust. Caleb looked at the bleeding corners of Pike's horse's mouth. He ought to help his horse first. Pike's hand moved toward his thigh. Vale stopped him with a glance. "We're searching for a girl," Vale said. 11, perhaps 12. Apache. Small, she separated from a group north of the military road during the storm. Separated by whom? Vale's eyes cooled. "That isn't your concern." "Then neither is the girl." For a moment only the flies moved. They gathered at the wet foam on the horses. Vale dismounted. He landed lightly and brushed dust from his coat. "The child carries information," he said. "Her people use a spring in Red Knife Canyon. Permanent water. Enough to support cattle, perhaps a settlement. The government wants it recorded." "The government sent you?" "I have authorization." "From whom?" Vale reached into his coat and unfolded a paper. He held it where Caleb could see the seal but not read the writing. The seal looked genuine. The signature might have belonged to anyone. Pike's eyes had returned to the well. "What information does a child carry?" Caleb asked. "Landmarks, tribal marks. Children's more than adults give them credit for. They also feel pain." Vale folded the paper. That sounded almost personal. Caleb kept his face still. Vale walked 3 steps into the yard without invitation. "You live alone, no hired hand, no neighbor within shouting distance. A girl could hide here easily." "She could." Pike grinned. Caleb continued, "So could a thief. That doesn't mean I have one." Vale's gaze moved over the porch, the stable, the half-open workshop door. He noticed the fresh ladder against the barn. "What are you building?" "Something with rungs." Pike laughed once through his nose. Vale's attention settled on the failed well. "I heard you dug that yourself." Ruth helped. The use of his wife's name surprised Caleb. He had not spoken it to another person in years. Vale knew it. Yes, I remember, hard winter. Caleb felt the old boardwalk beneath his boots, heard the mercantile door refusing to open. Vale had been in Pine Creek that winter, still a clerk then. He had stood behind the frosted window while Caleb pleaded for medicine. Perhaps he had not controlled the key. Perhaps he had only been afraid. Caleb had considered that possibility in the years since. It had never made the grave shallower. The well is dry, Caleb said. Pike nudged his horse closer. Then why cover it? Storm. Let's look. Caleb did not remember reaching for the rifle. One moment his hand was empty, the next the Winchester was in it, held low across his body. Vale lifted a palm. Easy. You're on my land, Caleb said. You asked a question, I answered. Pike stared at him with the flushed, eager look of a man who wanted permission to be violent. Vale, by contrast, became calmer. He glanced toward the dark storm remnants on the horizon, then back at the well. We'll take water for the horses, he said. Then we'll move on. You'll take 2 buckets. You'll pay for them. Vale smiled again. Of course. Caleb filled the buckets himself. He made Vale and Pike remain at the gate while the horses drank. Pike muttered about the amount. Caleb ignored him. When they mounted, Vale handed over a silver coin. Caleb let it fall into the dust. Vale looked down. Water's worth more than that today, Caleb said. What do you want? For you to remember you were given some. Vale's expression changed by less than a breath. Then he touched his hat brim. We'll circle north. If we find nothing, we may stop again. You found water. Don't mistake it for welcome. They rode away at an easy pace. Caleb waited until they disappeared beyond the low ridge. Then he walked behind the stable, climbed the ladder to the loft, and looked through a crack in the boards. The riders had stopped less than a mile away. They were watching the ranch. Caleb remained there until the heat beneath the roof made sweat run down his spine. Vale and Pike separated. Vale took the east trail. Pike circled west toward the wash. Not leaving then. Hunting. Caleb climbed down. He could not move Naya while they watched. He could not leave her in the well much longer. The cough had deepened. Her right foot was swollen, and when she shifted on the ledge, he had seen her bite her sleeve to stop a cry. He went to the kitchen and spread his old county map on the table. The map showed wagon tracks, claims, and the bold blue line of Pine Creek, which had been dry 3 months. It did not show the old sheep trail into Blacktooth Canyon, or the dead-end ravine where Caleb once spent a night after a flash flood took his horse. Vale wanted a path to hidden water. Caleb took a nub of pencil from the drawer. He began to draw one. Caleb drew 3 versions before the lie looked like the truth. The first was too neat. Vale would know it had been prepared for him. The second led too directly into Blacktooth Canyon. The third followed real landmarks for 6 miles, a split cedar, a basalt shelf, the remains of an abandoned sheep camp, then turned into country where the map became guesswork and the cliffs folded back on themselves. He rubbed dirt into the paper, creased it, and singed one corner over the stove. The work made him ashamed in a way he had not expected. He had lied before. Every man who traded horses lied about age, temperament, or how often an animal stumbled. But this was different. He was building a path that could break a horse's leg or strand a man without water. Caleb thought of Pike's spurs, the raw mouth of the bay, and Vale's sealed paper. He placed the map under Ruth's blue cup and went outside. The afternoon crawled. Pike appeared twice on the western ridge, no more than a dark shape between junipers. Vale did not show himself, which bothered Caleb more. He repaired tack in the workshop with the door open, making each movement ordinary. The awl punched leather. The mallet struck its block. Flies circled the oil jar. At sunset he fed the horses and left the barn door open. Darkness came late. Heat remained trapped in the stones after the sky went purple. Caleb waited until the first coyotes called from the lower wash, then carried the ladder to the well. "Naya," he whispered. A face appeared below the opening. He lifted the lid and lowered the ladder. "We have to move." She stared at the ladder, then at him. Caleb descended 2 rungs so she could see that it would hold. Slowly, Naya reached the bottom rung from her ledge. Her injured foot failed when she put weight on it. She caught the rawhide with both hands and made no sound. Caleb went down. The shaft smelled of dust, old lime, and sickness. Up close, he saw a cut along her hairline and purple bruising around her ankle. Her lips were cracked. She had wrapped the wool blanket around herself despite the heat, pinning it under one arm so her other hand remained free. "I'm going to lift you," he said. She raised the sharp stone. Caleb stopped. For several seconds they faced one another in the dim shaft. Then he pointed upward. "Men." He touched the rifle on his back, pointed toward the trail, and shook his head. He pointed to her, then to the root cellar beyond the house. Naya watched his hands. Her breathing quickened. Caleb lowered his arms. Your choice. He climbed 2 rungs and waited. The stone dropped to the ledge with a faint click. Naya reached for him. She weighed almost nothing. Caleb carried her up with one arm around her waist while she clung to his shirt. At the top she went rigid, staring across the open yard as if every shadow held a rider. Caleb crouched. She limped beside him, refusing to be carried again. The root cellar door lay behind the kitchen, beneath a sloping roof of earth and timber. Inside, the air was cool enough to raise bumps on Caleb's arms. Shelves held jars of beans, salt pork, onions, dried apples, and the last 3 crocks of goat cheese. A narrow cot stood against the rear wall. Naya when she saw the walls. Caleb understood too late. Another hole in the ground, another door. He left the door open and set the lamp outside the threshold. Moonlight reached partway down the steps. No lock, he said. He showed her the wooden latch and placed it on the ground. Naya touched the door, then the latch. She looked at him. No lock, Caleb repeated. She entered. Caleb warmed water and brought a basin, clean cloth, salve, beans, and a piece of cornbread. He placed everything within reach and back to the steps. Naya tore the bread in half. She set one piece aside before eating the other. For later? Caleb asked. She shook her head. She pointed to him. Caleb had forgotten supper. I have food. Naya continued to hold out the bread. He took it and ate. Only then did she begin on the beans. The gesture unsettled him more than gratitude would have. She had been hungry for days, yet she would not eat while he pretended he needed nothing. Caleb sat on the bottom step. After a while, Naya pointed toward the trail and said one word, Veil? Caleb repeated it as a question. She shook her head and drew 2 lines in the dust with her finger. One line curved like a canyon. The second crossed it. She made a circle near the intersection, then jabbed 3 dots beside it. 3 people? Naya touched her chest, then held up 2 fingers. She pointed north. Your family? She nodded, then frowned and added a 3rd dot farther away. Caleb guessed. Someone else with you? Naya used the edge of her hand to sweep the 3rd dot aside. Then she imitated the crack of a rifle. Caleb's stomach tightened. She drew a horse, crude but clear, then 2 stick figures with hats. One had a long coat, veil and pike. Naya nodded. She drew the circle again and cupped her hand as if drinking. The spring. Her finger pressed into the dust until the nail turned white. Veil had not merely heard of the child. He had chased her. Caleb pointed to the cut on her forehead. Them? She shook her head. She made a tumbling motion with both hands, then touched her ankle, fell into the wash, later into the well, perhaps. Caleb tried to picture an 11-year-old crossing the storm-dark plateau alone. Naya drew another figure, taller, with hair falling to one side. She touched her own shoulder, then pointed north again. Your mother? A change moved through her face. Not yes, not no. Aunt? Naya nodded. What's her name? The girl hesitated, then said Mara. The name came out carefully, offered rather than answered. Mara is looking for you. Naya looked toward the open cellar door. The confidence left her eyes. Caleb pointed to the north. I can take you after the riders leave. She shook her head hard enough to make her wince. Why? She drew the canyon again, then 4 small marks along its edge. She pointed to Caleb, herself, and the trail. Her meaning emerged slowly. Watchers. Veil had men on the routes. Caleb studied the dust map. How do they know about the spring? Naya reached beneath her torn shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch. She had kept it hidden even in the well. From it she removed a brass survey tag, a folded scrap of paper, and a short length of blue thread. The tag bore a number. The paper was torn from a larger sheet, but Caleb recognized Veil's name in the lower corner and a legal description of land near Red Knife Canyon. Above it, in another hand, someone had written, Existing use by Apache families. Claim contested. Naya tapped Veil's name. Caleb understood. Veil did not need the girl to find a legendary spring. He needed her because she could identify it, and because her family's use of the water stood between him and a claim. A hidden spring could be stolen. A known spring with witnesses became a dispute. The distinction would not matter to Pike. It might matter to an honest judge if one could be found before Veil filed papers and fenced the canyon. Where did you get this? Naya pointed south, mimed opening a box, then running. She had taken it from Veil's camp. Caleb looked at the brass tag again. He's afraid you'll show it to someone. Naya nodded. He folded the paper and returned it to her. You keep it. She pushed it back. Caleb shook his head. No, if they search me, they find it. Naya considered. Then she crossed the cellar, lifted the edge of a shelf plank, and slid the paper beneath it. She replaced the jars exactly as they had been. Caleb almost smiled. "You've done this before." She gave him a look that said the question was foolish. Her ankle needed tending. Caleb pointed to it and held up the salve. Naya's shoulders tightened, but she extended her leg. The swelling was worse than he thought. The skin was unbroken, which was something. He soaked a cloth in cool water, wrapped the joint, and bound it with a strip torn from a clean flour sack. His hands remembered how to be gentle before his mind did. He had wrapped Emily's wrists after she fell from the hayloft, Ruth's burned palm after a skillet slipped, newborn foals too weak to stand. Naya watched his face, not his hands. When he finished, she touched the scar across his left thumb. "Horse," Caleb said. She pointed to another scar near his wrist. Wire, a pale line along his forearm. Stupidity. Naya's mouth moved. It took Caleb a moment to realize she had smiled. He left her on the cot with the lamp turned low. At the top of the stairs he paused. "Naya." She looked up. He pointed to the bread she had saved, then to himself. "Thank you." She drew the blanket to her chin and closed her eyes. Caleb slept in the chair by the kitchen door with the rifle across his lap. Before dawn, someone tested the gate latch. The sound was small, cedar lifting against iron, then settling. Caleb was outside before the second touch. Pike stood beyond the fence, one hand on the latch and the other near his revolver. His horse was tied farther down the trail. He had approached on foot. "Early visit," Caleb said. Pike turned without surprise. "Couldn't sleep. Try whiskey. You smell like you know it." Pike's beard lifted in a smile. "Vale thinks you're hiding something. Vale thinks breathing is hiding something. He pays well for being right." Caleb stayed in the shadow of the porch. "You came to talk about his virtues?" Pike looked toward the house. "I came to save you trouble. Give us the girl. Vale gets his spring. The army gets its road. You keep your ranch." "He offer you my ranch? He could take it." "With what?" "Paper." Caleb glanced at the tied horse. Pike had ridden it hard again. One hind leg trembled. "You believe paper can make a thing yours?" Caleb asked. "I believe men with paper hire men with guns." There was no pride in the answer, only experience. "What does Vale hold over you?" Pike's eyes narrowed. "Debt?" Caleb continued. "A warrant? Or does he simply know you'll do what decent men won't?" Pike stepped through the gate. Caleb raised the rifle. They stood 20 feet apart. Pike's hand hovered over the revolver, but he did not draw. Up close, Caleb saw fatigue in his face beneath the aggression. The man had not slept. Dust had cracked the skin around his eyes. "I had a freight outfit," Pike said. 2 wagons, 4 mules. Partner ran off with the money. Vale bought the note. That explained the horse's mouth? Pike's jaw tightened. "Don't preach." "I'm not." A muffled cough sounded from beneath the kitchen floor. Pike heard it. His gaze shifted to the house. Caleb worked the lever of the rifle. The metallic click seemed to sharpen the dawn. Pike looked back at him. "That your goat?" "My goat sleeps in the barn." For 1 second, Caleb believed Pike would draw. He saw the decision arrive and hesitate behind the man's eyes. Then Buck whinnied from the corral. Pike's horse answered from the trail, a thin, exhausted sound. Pike let his hand fall. "Vale will come back," he said. "He'll bring authority next time. Will you?" Pike looked toward the hidden root cellar again. "I go where the note goes." He backed through the gate. Caleb did not lower the rifle until the horse carried him over the ridge. In the cellar, Naya was awake, sitting with the sharp stone in her hand. "He heard you," Caleb said. She looked toward the steps. But he left. Naya's expression did not change. She did not mistake delay for mercy. Caleb brought her outside before sunrise, when the yard remained blue with shadow. She had to see the route if they needed to run. He showed her the barn loft, the rear door of the workshop, and the narrow path through the chicken yard that led to the wash. She limped but moved quickly, using a cedar stick for balance. At the corral she stopped. Buck approached the fence and lowered his head. Naya held out one hand. The gelding breathed over her fingers, smelling the bandage and dust. She touched the white star between his eyes. "You ride?" Caleb asked. Naya nodded. "Better than Pike?" She nodded again with no hesitation. Caleb led Buck out and tightened a blanket around his middle instead of saddling him. Naya put her good foot in Caleb's linked hands and swung onto the gelding. She sat easily despite the injured ankle. For a few minutes he led them around the yard. Buck's hoofbeats were soft in the dust. Naya's shoulders loosened. The sight struck Caleb with such force that he had to look away. Emily had ridden the same way, bareback, both hands buried in Buck's mane before he turned gray around the muzzle. She had sung nonsense to him and insisted he preferred it to adult conversation. Naya said something. Caleb looked up. She pointed to the well, then to the north. Mara, you think she'll come here? Naya touched the polished stone Caleb had placed in his pocket. She had noticed it. She pointed west, where the storm had erased the land, then traced a circle in the air around the ranch. Signs, tracks perhaps, messages left before she fell. Her people would follow what the storm had not destroyed. When? Naya held up 4 fingers. 4 days? She nodded. This was the 3rd morning. Caleb looked at the ridge where Pike had vanished. They needed 1 more day. He helped Naya down and returned her to the cellar before full light. Then he made breakfast. Coffee for himself, cornmeal porridge for her, and an egg divided between them. Naya ate slowly now. Color had begun to return beneath the dust on her face. Caleb opened the cellar door wider and set a wash basin near the cot. He found one of Emily's old shirts in the cedar chest. It had yellowed at the collar but was clean. He placed it beside the basin without comment. When he came back, Naya had washed her face and braided her hair. The shirt reached her knees. She had folded her torn one and tucked the leather pouch inside. She looked younger, clean. That made the danger feel worse. By mid-morning, the heat gathered again. Caleb worked at the corral, repairing a gate that did not need repair. He saw no riders, but twice caught a brief flash from the east ridge, sun on glass. Vale was watching through field glasses. Caleb made himself yawn. At noon, he carried the false map to the workshop and left the door open. He pretended to discover it beneath an old saddle blanket. He held it to the light, looked toward the canyon, and then hurried into the house. If Vale wanted a performance, Caleb would give him one. He took Ruth's old medicine bottle, filled it with goat milk, and poured half over his shirt. He rubbed dust into his hair, left his hat behind, and stepped onto the porch with the map clutched in one hand. Then he began arguing with the wind. At first he felt foolish. He shouted about voices under the stones and water running uphill. He laughed at nothing. He circled the well, but never approached close enough to draw attention to the fresh scrape near the lid. The flash on the ridge disappeared. Caleb raised the map above his head. "I found you," he yelled toward Blacktooth Canyon. 40 feet under the red wall, singing like a woman in a church. Hoofbeats came within minutes. Vale and Pike rode through the gate without asking. Vale's face shone with sweat. "What did you find?" Caleb turned too slowly, widening his eyes. "You. What is that paper?" "Nothing." Vale dismounted. "Give it to me." Caleb backed away, clutching the map to his chest. "It drinks men." Pike glanced at Vale. "He's cracked." "Quiet," Vale said. Caleb let his knees buckle. He dropped beside the well and began drawing circles in the dust with one finger. "The girl showed me," he whispered. Both men went still. Vale crouched several feet away. "You saw her?" "In the storm, walking where the cliff has 3 teeth. She put her hand on the wall and water came through the rock." "Where?" Caleb stared past him. Vale's patience broke. He seized Caleb's shirt. "Where?" The movement brought Vale close enough for Caleb to smell mint on his breath and old sweat beneath his cologne. Caleb allowed the false map to slip from his hand. Pike picked it up first. Vale released Caleb and snatched the paper. His eyes moved over the landmarks. Caleb watched recognition take hold at the real features, then greed carry him past the false turn. "The split cedar," Vale murmured. "I saw it yesterday." Pike studied the map over his shoulder. "That last wash is bad country." "So are you," Caleb said dreamily. Pike looked at him. Vale stood. "How long to the 3-tooth cliff?" "Before dark if we push." "Storm damage may have changed the cut," Pike warned. Vale folded the map and put it inside his coat. "That is why I pay you." "You don't pay, you subtract." Vale's expression hardened. "Mount up." Pike remained where he was. His gaze moved to the well, then to the house. For an instant it met Caleb's. Caleb saw that Pike knew the madness was an act. He also saw that Pike did not tell Vale. "Your note," Vale said quietly, "includes your sister's property now." Pike's face emptied. He walked to his horse. Vale tipped his hat to Caleb. "Enjoy your voices." They rode north toward the split cedar. Caleb stayed on his knees until the hoofbeats faded. Only then did he stand. His legs shook from holding the performance. Vale's grip had torn 2 buttons from his shirt. He found one in the dust and put it in his pocket from habit. Naya waited at the root cellar door. She had heard everything. "They're going the wrong way," Caleb said. Her eyes went to the north. "They may come back." Naya touched the swelling at her ankle, then pointed to the rifle. "No," Caleb said. She pointed again. "I know what it's for." Naya shook her head. She touched the rifle, then his chest. He understood her question. Could he use it? Caleb looked down the empty trail. "Yes," he said, "but I'd rather not." Naya considered that answer. Then she took the cedar stick and limped toward the kitchen. "What are you doing?" She pointed to the flour bin, then to the back door. They spent the next hour making the ranch lie. Naya sprinkled flour across the root cellar steps and brushed it smooth with a feather, so any footprint would show. Caleb dragged a feed sack from the well toward the barn to create marks that looked old after he dusted them over. Naya moved the bowl and blanket from the cellar into a hidden space beneath the workshop floor. Caleb filled the well with loose stones on the ledge where she had stayed, making it appear long unused if someone shone a lamp down. She worked quickly and without instruction. This was not a game she had learned that morning. When they finished, Naya sat on the kitchen floor, pale with fatigue. Caleb poured water into a cup. The barrel gave a hollow gurgle. He looked inside. Less than 2 gallons remained. The storm had filled the catch basin with dust, fouled the shallow tank, and loosened the pipe from the spring box half a mile east. Until he repaired it, every living thing on the ranch depended on what stood in the kitchen barrel and 2 covered buckets in the pantry. 3 horses, 1 goat, chickens, a man, a child with fever. Caleb set the cup in Naya's hands. She drank half and offered it back. He took 1 swallow, though he wanted all of it. Outside, the sun climbed, white and without mercy. Caleb spent the hottest part of the day at the spring line. The ranch spring was not a true spring, only a seep where water collected beneath a shelf of limestone and fed a clay pipe leading to the house. The storm had buried the box under red mud and broken 1 joint. Caleb carried a shovel, a wrench, and an empty bucket across the half-mile of open ground. Naya remained in the cellar with instructions to bar the kitchen door if she saw dust on the trail. Caleb hated leaving her, but without water the ranch would fail before Vale returned. The heat made distance wobble. Each fence post seemed to float above the earth. Caleb dug through the storm drift, breathing through a wet cloth, until he uncovered the spring box. The water inside was brown and full of needles. A dead mouse floated near the intake. He cleaned the box with his hands, scooping mud into the sun. The clay pipe had cracked where a stone shifted. He wrapped the joint with canvas, pine pitch, and wire. It would leak, but it might carry enough. When he opened the intake, nothing came. Caleb lay flat and reached into the dark channel beneath the limestone. His fingertips found roots, then packed silt. He scraped until his nails split. At last, cold water touched his wrist. A thread ran into the box. He watched it gather 1 drop at a time. It would take hours to reach the house. On the walk back, he saw buzzards circling north of Blacktooth Canyon. 2, then 3. He told himself they could be over a deer. At the ranch, Naya stood behind the kitchen window with the rifle too large in her hands. When she recognized him, the barrel lowered. "You were supposed to stay down." She pointed to the southern trail. A horse stood there without a rider. Caleb dropped the tools. The animal was Pike's, its reins dragged. 1 stirrup was missing, and a dark scrape ran along its flank. The horse came willingly when Caleb approached, desperate for shade. He found Pike an hour later in the wash, half a mile south. The man lay beneath a mesquite with his shirt tied around his head. Blood had dried from his ear to his collar. 1 boot was gone. Caleb knelt beyond arm's reach. "Where's Vale?" Pike opened 1 eye. "Still rich, last I saw. What happened?" "Horse went down in the cut. Vale took my water and kept going." Caleb looked at the bare foot, blistered and cut. "You knew the map was false, suspected, and followed." Pike laughed weakly. "You ever had a man own the roof over your sister?" Caleb had no answer. Pike tried to sit and failed. "Girl at your place?" Caleb's hand moved toward his revolver. Pike saw. "If I meant to tell him, I'd have told him before the canyon. You may yet. Vale left me for dead." Pike closed his eye. "Debt's hard to collect from a corpse." Caleb should have walked away. Pike had hunted a child. He had stood at the well with his hand near a gun. He had ridden an animal until its mouth bled. Caleb remembered snow on the Pine Creek boardwalk and men breathing safely behind a locked door. He lifted Pike by the arm. The man groaned. "Don't mistake me for deserving. I won't." Caleb brought him to the barn, not the house. He washed the head wound with a cup of water and stitched the worst cut with horsehair. Pike bit down on a folded strap and did not cry out. Naya watched through a crack in the kitchen shutters. When Caleb finished, Pike drank half a dipper and handed it back. "Vale filed the spring claim last month," he said. "Needs proof nobody uses it." The girl's aunt argued with his surveyor. Then a patrol found their camp. "Vale arranged that?" Pike stared at the barn rafters. "He arranged a lot. Will he come here?" "He'll come if the canyon doesn't kill him." Caleb wrapped Pike's foot. "Can you ride?" "Not well. You're leaving before dark." Pike looked toward the shutter. He had seen Naya's eye. "I never saw anyone," he said. Caleb tied the bandage tighter than necessary. Pike grunted. "Fair." The repaired pipe began dripping into the kitchen barrel near sunset. Each drop struck the bottom with a small hollow sound. Caleb counted without meaning to. 30 drops a minute. Not enough for the animals, but enough to promise that the line had not failed entirely. Pike sat on an upturned crate in the barn wearing one of Caleb's old boots. It was too narrow, and his heel hung over the back. His head bandage made him look less dangerous, which Caleb knew was not the same as harmless. Naya had returned to the cellar. She took the scrap bearing Vale's name from beneath the shelf and placed it inside her shirt. Caleb gave Pike dried meat, a canteen with 2 cups of water, and the gray gelding's oldest saddle. "That horse comes back sound," he said. Pike adjusted the stirrup. "You care more for him than you do for me." "Yes." Pike nodded, as if relieved by the honesty. At the gate, he paused. "Vale has a deputy in Pine Creek, man named Sutter. Badge belongs to the county. Rest of him belongs to Vale. Why tell me?" "So you don't mistake a badge for help." Pike looked toward the house. "The women looking for that girl left signs along the north ridge. Vale's men covered some, not all." "What kind of signs?" 3 stones in a line. Cedar bark tied low where wind won't take it." Caleb thought of the polished river stone. Did Vale see them? He saw what money lets him see. Pike gathered the reins. "What will you do?" Caleb asked. "Ride to my sister's. Burn the note if I can find it. Vale will hunt you. He's busy hunting water." Pike touched 2 fingers to his hat and rode south. Caleb watched the gelding's gait until he was certain Pike was not pushing him. Back at the house, Naya stood beside the barrel listening to the drip. "Man gone," Caleb said. She held his gaze. "He won't tell Vale." Naya looked unconvinced. "I may be wrong." That answer she accepted. Caleb poured the collected water into a cup, barely 2 fingers' depth. He offered it to her. She shook her head and pointed to him. "I drank." She touched his dry lips. Caleb set the cup on the table. "We split it." He poured half into Ruth's blue enamel cup and half into a tin one. They drank facing each other in the kitchen, while evening light turned the dust on the shelves to gold. Naya placed her cup upside down beside his. The fever worsened after dark. She began shivering, though the cellar remained warm. Caleb moved her to the kitchen cot, where air could pass through the open windows. He soaked cloths in the little water the pipe produced and laid them across her forehead. She muttered in a language he did not understand, sometimes reaching as if for someone beyond the wall. Caleb sat beside her. Near midnight she woke and gripped his wrist. "Mara," she said. "Coming." Naya shook her head. He leaned closer. "Morning," she whispered. "Mara morning. She'll come in the morning." Naya's fingers tightened. Vale. Caleb looked toward the dark trail. "I'll be here." She released him only after he placed the rifle against the chair where she could see it. The night passed by inches. Caleb fed the stove 1 stick at a time, not for heat, but to boil water. He mixed willow bark from an old remedy jar and persuaded Naya to drink 3 mouthfuls. He listened to the pipe drip. He wiped sweat from her neck. Once, when her breathing turned too shallow, panic struck him so hard he stood without knowing why. For a moment the cot held Emily. Not Naya's black braid and brown hand, but Emily's pale hair damp with fever. Ruth kneeling on the floor, the lamp running out of oil. He smelled snow melting on wool. He heard the locked mercantile door. Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them, Naya was watching him. He took her hand. "I couldn't save them," he said. "That isn't your burden." She did not understand the words. Perhaps she understood the voice. Her thumb moved once across the scar on his wrist. By 3 in the morning, the fever broke. Sweat soaked the collar of Emily's old shirt. Naya slept deeply. Caleb carried the basin outside and poured the used water at the roots of the peach tree Ruth had planted. The tree had not borne fruit in 6 years. 1 branch remained green. A faint light showed over the northern ridge. Caleb heard no hoofbeats, no voices, yet the horses lifted their heads together. 3 figures stood beyond the north fence. They had appeared so quietly that Caleb first mistook them for junipers. The central figure was an older woman wrapped in a dark woven blanket. To her right stood a younger woman with a bow in one hand. The third carried a leather bag and a bundle of plants tied beneath her shoulder. None pointed a weapon at him. None lowered one. Caleb set the basin down. The older woman looked at the open kitchen window. Then at the well, her gaze returned to Caleb. He raised both empty hands. "Naya is alive," he said. The younger woman's face changed, only slightly, but enough. The older woman stepped through the gap beside the gate. "Where?" Her English was clear. "Inside." She had fever. It broke. The younger woman moved past Caleb before the older one answered. She entered the house with the speed of someone who had spent 4 days imagining a body. The older woman followed more slowly. The third paused beside Caleb. She smelled of sage, leather, and wood smoke. You gave her medicine. Willow bark, water. Not enough of either. She studied the cracked skin around his mouth. Not enough for you also. Caleb looked away. From inside the house came a cry. It was not loud. It began as Naya's name spoken by the younger woman and broke halfway through. Caleb stayed in the yard. The reunion belonged to them. Dawn widened over the rim, gray becoming lavender, lavender warming toward rose. The older woman returned to the doorway and motioned him in. Naya sat on the cot wrapped in the wool blanket. The younger woman knelt in front of her, holding both her hands. Tears had cut clean paths through the dust on the woman's face. The older woman touched her own chest. Mara. Caleb nodded. She said your name. Mara looked at Naya. They spoke quietly. Naya answered in fragments, pointing toward the cellar, the well, and Caleb. She described something with both hands, then mimicked a man staggering and laughing. Caleb hoped that was his performance for Vale and not a medical judgment. The younger woman glanced at him. A reluctant smile touched one corner of her mouth. Mara said, my sister's daughter says you shouted at the wind. It was listening. This time the younger woman did smile. The healer opened her bag beside the cot. I am Leda. This is Sani. Caleb inclined his head. Leda unwrapped Naya's ankle, examined the swelling, and smelled the willow drink. She asked what Naya had eaten and how often. Caleb answered as best he could. Leda's questions were practical and exact. She did not praise him. She did not need to. Mara saw the folded scrap inside Naya's shirt. You still have it. Naya removed the survey fragment and brass tag. Mara's expression hardened. Vale came here, Caleb said. We know. How? Sani placed something on the table. One of Vale's cream-colored gloves, torn across the palm. We found his camp, she said. Then Pike. Caleb stiffened. He told you? He told us Vale left him in the canyon. He also told us a foolish horseman gave him water. Pike talks too much. He said the same of you. Mara spread the survey scrap beside the brass tag. From beneath her blanket she produced 3 additional papers wrapped in oilcloth. One was a copy of an earlier claim, witnessed by a missionary and 2 ranchers. Another recorded seasonal use of the spring by Apache families before Vale's filing. The third bore the signature of an army interpreter. Vale burned our first copies, Mara said. He thought Naya took the only piece left from his box. She took what proved his new survey crossed the old boundary. Will that stop him? In a court? Maybe. On the trail? This paper stops only men who fear what follows it. Caleb looked at Sani's bow. Mara followed his gaze. We did not come to make war at your house. Vale may. Then he brings it. Naya said something sharply. Mara listened, then turned to Caleb. She says you have little water. The line is running again. Leda went to the barrel and listened to the drip. This will not fill enough before the sun. We manage. Mara studied him for a long moment. Men say that when they mean women and children manage their dying. Caleb almost objected. Then he remembered Ruth saying nearly the same thing during their first drought. Mara sent Sani to the North Ridge. Leda mixed ground leaves with warm water and made Naya drink. Then she handed the cup to Caleb. I'm not sick. You are dry. He drank. The liquid was bitter and smelled of mint. His stomach cramped at the sudden water. Mara stepped onto the porch. There is a seep east of here. My spring line. A smaller one above it. Storm may have opened the shale. Caleb frowned. I've walked that slope. After this storm? No. Mara pointed toward the peach tree. Your birds know. 2 jays hopped along the ground beneath the tree, pecking at damp mud where Caleb had poured the basin. Those birds are drinking what I spilled. One came from the east with wet breast feathers. Caleb stared at the jay. The feathers beneath its throat were indeed darker. Mara looked toward the brightening ridge. Sani will find it. You're leaving soon? When Naya can ride. She shouldn't travel today. No. The answer was immediate. Mara's hand rested on the porch rail, scarred and steady. But Vale is between us and our camp. His other men may follow. How many? 2 near the lower road. 1 went to Pine Creek. None are close yet. Caleb picked up the rifle. Mara said, you have already chosen? He came through my gate. That was not my question. Caleb looked into the kitchen. Naya had fallen asleep again. Emily's yellowed shirt showed at the collar of the blanket. On the table stood the blue cup, the wren skull, and the polished stone. I chose when I lowered the canteen, he said. Mara nodded, not approving or thanking, merely accepting the fact. Sani returned an hour later with wet mud on her moccasins. She carried a clay jar filled to the neck. The water tasted of stone and roots and was cold enough to hurt Caleb's teeth. "There is a pool beneath the shale," Saini said. "Small, clean. Enough for today." Caleb took buckets and followed her. The path rose beyond the broken spring box to a narrow cut hidden by manzanita. The storm had torn away a slab of packed earth. Water seeped from a crack no wider than a knife blade and gathered in a hollow basin of rock. He had passed within 30 yards of it for years. They filled 2 buckets in silence. On the way back, Sani said, "Vale believes Naya knows every water place in these mountains. She knew this one?" "No." Caleb glanced at her. Sani's face remained serious. A bird knew. He laughed before he could stop himself. The sound startled both of them. It was rusty and brief, but it was laughter. When they reached the ranch, the sun had cleared the ridge. The horses drank. The goat drank. Caleb filled the kitchen barrel and watched clear water cover the bottom. For one ordinary minute, with a bucket in each hand and morning light on the floor, the danger seemed far away. Then a rifle shot sounded from the southern trail. The shot struck the iron triangle beside the gate. Its clang rolled across the yard and sent the chickens flapping beneath the porch. Buck reared against the corral rail. Caleb dropped one bucket, drew the rifle from the crook of his arm, and moved toward the house. "Inside," he said. Mara did not move. Neither did Sani. Lita pulled Naya from the cot and guided her toward the root cellar. Naya resisted, pointing at the window. "Go," Mara told her. A rider appeared beyond the southern rise. Harlan Vale came at a slow walk. Hat gone, coat torn, one side of his face blistered by sun. His horse stumbled every few steps. The animal's flanks were hollow and dried foam crusted its neck. Vale held his revolver upright. Caleb stepped through the gate and shut it behind him. Vale stopped 30 yards away. "You sent me into a dead canyon," he said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its polished ease. "You rode there yourself. Pike is gone. He survived." That shook Vale. "You saw him?" He borrowed a horse. Vale looked toward the barn, perhaps counting saddles. His gaze shifted to the 3 women on the porch. There it was, not surprise, exactly, recognition. He had seen Mara before. "You," Vale said. Mara rested one hand on the porch rail. "You remember the spring now?" "I remember trespassers." Sani moved into the shadow beside the door. Her bow remained lowered, but an arrow lay across it. Vale laughed. The sound cracked. "Ward, do you understand who these people are? Do you know what it means to harbor fugitives?" Caleb worked the rifle lever and let the spent brass from an old chamber fall into the dust. "I understand my gate. I have a federal order. You showed me a folded paper." Vale reached inside his coat. Caleb's rifle rose. Slowly, Vale withdrew the document and held it out. "Read it." "You read it." Vale's lips tightened. "By authority of the Territorial District and in cooperation with the United States Army, I am empowered to locate and secure persons unlawfully absent from designated land." "Does it name Naya?" Vale glanced at the house. Caleb had not meant to speak her name. The mistake felt like a door opening. "Then she is here," Vale said. Mara descended the porch steps. "The paper does not name her." Vale's eyes moved to the oilcloth packet in her hand. Mara continued, "It does not name any child. It gives you permission to report, not to seize. You cannot read English. I read enough. So did the priest who copied it for me." Vale's revolver lowered a fraction. Caleb saw the calculation begin. Vale had expected a lonely rancher and a frightened girl. He had found witnesses, documents, and a woman who knew the limits of his authority. "You stole survey property," Vale said. Mara opened the packet. "Your survey crossed our water place. Your men pulled our markers. Your fire destroyed the shade house and food store. It was an accidental burn. Naya saw the kerosene. The cellar door opened behind them. Caleb did not turn. He knew by the silence who had come out. Naya crossed the yard with Emily's shirt hanging loose over her skirt. The bandage on her ankle showed white in the red dust. Lita followed one step behind, close enough to catch her but not holding her. Vale stared. Naya stopped beside Mara and took the brass survey tag from her pouch. She held it up. "You dropped this," she said. The words were accented and quiet, but they carried. Vale's face changed. For the first time, Caleb saw fear without anger covering it. The numbered tag connected Vale to the altered boundary. The paper fragment connected the tag to his claim. A court might still favor him. A deputy might still accept his money. But the matter would no longer vanish cleanly. Vale raised the revolver. Caleb shouldered the rifle. Sani's bow came taut. 3 movements, nearly one sound. Naya did not flinch. Vale's horse did. The exhausted animal shied beneath him, jerking sideways. Vale fought the reins, cursing. The revolver swung toward the ground. Caleb had a clear shot. He saw the front sight settle against Vale's chest. He felt the rifle stock firm in his shoulder. A small pressure of the finger would finish the argument. Behind Vale, the southern road lay empty. Beyond that stood Pine Creek, the locked mercantile, the cemetery, every man who had watched from safety while Ruth and Emily died. Vale had been one face at the window, perhaps the clearest face. Caleb's finger tightened. Then Naya said his name, not loudly, just Caleb. He lowered the muzzle an inch. Vale recovered the reins. He looked from the rifle to the bow, then to Naya. Sweat cut pale lines through the dust on his face. You think paper will save you? He asked Mara. No, she said. People will. Vale gave a tired, bitter smile. People want water. They always choose water. Then why did Pike choose to leave you? The smile vanished. Mara stepped closer to the gate. He knows what is in these papers. He knows what you did at the camp. He knows you took his canteen and left him under the cliff. Vale looked toward Caleb. Pike is a debtor and a drunk. He's also alive, Caleb said. That makes him inconvenient. A gust moved across the yard, lifting loose dust. The rising sun flashed on the turquoise bead at Naya's throat. Vale's revolver hung beside his leg. I can return with men. Caleb nodded. Bring enough to read. You'll lose this ranch, maybe. They'll call you a traitor. They already call me worse. Vale stared at him, searching for the place where fear should have been. Caleb felt fear. His mouth was dry, his left knee trembled. The ranch was the only property he owned, the work of 15 years. The last place Ruth's hands had shaped. Vale could ruin him with taxes, liens, testimony, or fire. But fear was not the same as surrender. Caleb had confused the two for a long time. Vale turned to Naya. Your people cannot protect that spring. Miners will come. Cattle will come. The army will make a road whether I own the claim or not. Naya looked at Mara, then back at him. Not yours, she said. 2 words. Vale holstered the revolver. For an instant he appeared older than Caleb had ever seen him, a man exhausted by a hunger he could not satisfy. He looked toward the water buckets beside the house. My horse needs a drink. Caleb's jaw tightened. Sani said something under her breath that might have been objection. Mara waited. The choice irritated Caleb. Vale had chased Naya, burned a camp, abandoned Pike, and returned shooting at the gate. Refusing him water would be easy to explain. The horse lowered its head, knees trembling. Caleb opened the gate. You dismount, he said. Leave the gun in the dust. The horse drinks. You don't. Vale stared. The animal didn't draw the map. For a moment pride nearly killed the horse. Then Vale slid from the saddle. He removed the revolver and placed it on the road. Caleb led the animal to the trough. It tried to plunge its nose too deep. He held the bridle and allowed short drinks, resting between them so it would not founder. The horse leaned against him, shaking. Vale stood beyond the gate under Sani's watch. You always were sentimental about animals, he said. Caleb wiped foam from the bit. They remember what a hand does. Vale's gaze shifted to the house. So do children. Yes. The horse drank again. When it could stand without swaying, Caleb led it back. Vale reached for the reins. Caleb did not release them. You ride slow. Vale's eyes narrowed. Or the horse stays and you walk. You have developed a great deal of authority overnight. No, I just stopped lending it to you. Vale took the reins. He picked up his revolver only after he had mounted. He did not holster it until he was 50 yards down the road. At the crest of the rise he turned once. Caleb stood at the open gate. Mara, Sani, and Lita waited behind him. Naya stood between them, one hand resting on the cedar post. Vale looked small against the white morning sky. Then he rode south. No one spoke until the heat swallowed him. Caleb lowered the rifle. His arms felt suddenly heavy. Naya sat down in the dust. Lita reached her first, touching her forehead and checking her pulse with an expression that rebuked every person who had allowed the confrontation to last. Mara crouched beside them. Sani remained at the gate, watching the road. Caleb picked up the dropped water bucket. Most had soaked into the ground, leaving a dark patch already shrinking at the edges. His hands began to shake. He carried the bucket to the porch and set it down before he spilled the rest. Mara came to stand beside him. You could have killed him, she said. Yes, why didn't you? Caleb looked at the bullet dent in the iron triangle. It swung slightly in the breeze. I heard my name. Mara followed his gaze to Naya. She gave it back to you, she said. Caleb did not ask what she meant. He sat on the porch step and pressed both hands together until the shaking eased. Lita made him drink again. This time he did not argue. The day became ordinary by force. There were animals to water, a spring box to clear, a meal to cook. Sani repaired the broken section of north fence with rawhide because Caleb's wire had run short. Mara cleaned the kitchen table and arranged the papers in order. Lita washed Naya's hair with warm water and combed out the knots. Caleb fried salt pork and onions, added beans, and stretched the pot with cornmeal. The smell filled the house. 6 people sat down to eat. Caleb had only 4 chairs. Mara used the flour barrel, Santi sat on the hearthstone, and Naya took the cot with her bandaged foot raised. Bowls did not match. 1 was wood, 2 were tin, 1 was cracked china. Caleb served everyone before himself. Conversation came in 2 languages. Sometimes Mara translated. Sometimes no one did. Sani told a story that made Naya laugh so hard she spilled broth on Emily's shirt. Lita clicked her tongue and dabbed it with a cloth. Mara asked Caleb how many horses he trained each year and whether the gray gelding bit. Only men he dislikes, Caleb said. Sani glanced toward the southern road. Wise horse. Caleb smiled into his bowl. After the meal, Mara spread the papers again. We go to Fort Apache first. The interpreter who signed the older claim is there. Then we send copies to the district judge. Vale will reach Pine Creek before you reach the fort. He will. He owns Sutter. Pike knows another deputy in Show Low. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Pike has become useful. Pain sometimes clears a man's sight. Sometimes it only makes him mean. Mara accepted that. We leave before sunset, she said. Travel at night, rest after sunrise. Caleb looked at Naya. Her ankle? I can ride, Naya said. Lita answered in her language. Naya scowled. Mara translated. Lita says you can sit on a horse. That is not the same as riding for 12 hours. Caleb went to the barn and found the small roan mare he used for packing. She was steady, wide-backed, and less likely to challenge an injured rider. He patted the saddle with folded blankets and shortened the stirrups. Naya watched from the shade. This is Rose, Caleb said. She dislikes snakes and men in yellow shirts. Naya touched the mare's neck. Why yellow? Never learned. Naya looked at his faded brown shirt. Safe, so far. He showed her how he had tied the lead rope so Mara could control Rose on steep ground. Naya inspected every knot. She retied one. Caleb pulled it. Her knot held better. I'll pretend I taught you that. Naya's smile faded. She looked toward the dry well. Together they walked there. The lid lay aside. Morning light reached the ledge where Caleb had found her. The loose stones they had placed there made the shaft look abandoned again. Naya sat on the rim. From her pouch she removed the polished river stone. Caleb had believed she had given it to him, but sometime during the confusion she had taken it back from the table. She held it in her palm, then placed it in his. For water, she said. You already gave me this. She shook her head. For remember, Caleb closed his fingers around it. Naya took the wren skull from her pouch next and set it in a shallow crack between 2 stones. For home, she said. Caleb looked down the dry shaft. Not much of a home. Naya touched the rim. Was. A place did not have to be good to have saved a life. Caleb sat beside her. The sun warmed the stone through his trousers. My daughter was named Emily, he said. Naya waited. She was 7. She rode Buck when he was young and stupid. She thought she could sing. Could she? No, Naya considered. Maybe Horse liked. He did. Caleb told her about the calf stepping on Emily's boot, the honey on her teeth, the way she collected blue buttons in a tobacco tin. He did not tell the fever. Naya already knew enough about people disappearing. When he finished, she asked, Shirt hers? Yes. Naya looked down at the yellowed cloth. You keep it, Caleb said. She touched the sleeve with care. I bring back. You don't have to. I bring. Caleb knew better than to argue with someone who had survived a storm in a well. Near dusk, Sani returned from a final circuit of the ridge. No riders close. The horses were saddled. Water skins hung full. Caleb packed beans, dried apples, jerky, a small sack of cornmeal, and 2 precious spoonfuls of coffee. Mara tried to refuse the coffee. You'll need something to complain about when the water boils, Caleb said. She took it. Letta left him packets of willow bark, yarrow, and mint. She explained each twice. Caleb repeated the instructions until she believed he would not poison himself. Sani stood at the gate beside the cedar post. With the point of her knife, she cut 3 short lines into the wood, then a longer line beneath them. The mark was simple, no wider than Caleb's palm. What does it say? He asked. It says someone watched here, she replied. Watched what? Sani sheathed the knife, the gate. Mara tied a small object beneath the latch with a strip of smoked hide. It was a piece of dark volcanic glass wrapped in copper wire, with a turquoise bead at the center. Not ornate, not magical. A thing made by hand and carried long enough for the copper to shine where fingers had touched it. This belonged to Naya's mother, Mara said. She would want it at the place her daughter lived. Caleb looked at Naya. The girl nodded. I can't take that. You are not taking, Mara said. It is staying. That distinction ended the argument. They mounted in the cooling light. Mara rode in front, leading Naya's roan. Sani ranged ahead. Lita carried the papers inside her shirt, while Naya kept the brass tag. At the gate, Naya leaned down. Caleb expected a farewell. Instead, she pointed to the east slope. Birdwater, she said. Cover from deer, make stone. A springbox? She nodded, then tree. Caleb followed her gaze to Ruth's peach tree. If there's enough. Naya's expression told him not to insult water by deciding what it could do before he tried. She reached down and touched 2 fingers to his wrist. Then they rode north. Caleb stood beside the gate until the last sound of hooves faded into the junipers. The ranch became quiet, not empty, quiet. On the porch table, 6 used bowls waited to be washed. A black braid hair clung to the comb beside the basin. The cot blanket had been folded with Naya's exact square corners. The house held the smell of beans, mint, horse leather, and wood smoke. Caleb walked to the gate and touched the object beneath the latch. The turquoise bead was warm from the day. Caleb washed the bowls after dark. He warmed a kettle because Ruth had always said grease did not leave tin for cold water, no matter how hard a man wished. He dried each bowl and returned it to the shelf. When he came to the cracked china one, he noticed a smear of blue on the rim where Naya's sleeve had touched it. He left the bowl on the table. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak beneath the floor sounded like a child moving in the cellar. Twice he rose and checked the southern window. The road remained pale and empty under the moon. Before dawn, he saddled Buck and rode to the east seep. He brought the shovel, the broken washtub, a length of clay pipe, and 3 flat stones from the failed well. The work took all morning. He cleared roots from the hollow, deepened the basin, and lined it so mud would settle before water entered the pipe. He built a low cover of stone and cedar poles to keep deer from stepping into it. The flow was not strong, but it was clean. By afternoon, a thin stream ran through the repaired line into the ranch barrel. Caleb stood with one hand under it. Cold water crossed his palm and dripped from his wrist. He thought of the polished stone in his pocket, rounded by a river that might have vanished generations ago while the stone remembered its touch. He carried a full bucket to the peach tree. The soil around the trunk drank greedily. Caleb poured slowly, letting the water sink instead of running away. When the bucket was empty, he pressed the damp earth with his boot. "Your turn," he told the tree. For 3 days, no rider came. Caleb repaired the canvas, reset the fence, and cleaned dust from the house. He moved the wren's skull from the well to a small shelf beside the kitchen window, where sunlight would not bleach it further. The polished stone stayed in his pocket until its smooth shape became as familiar as a coin. On the 4th morning, Deputy Sutter rode through the gate with a folded notice. He was younger than Caleb remembered, or perhaps merely softer. His vest strained across his stomach. A nickel-plated badge shone against it. He accepted coffee but not breakfast. "This is an order to permit inspection," Sutter said. Caleb read the page. It authorized a county deputy to search for stolen survey equipment. It did not mention Naya. It did not mention fugitives. Vale's signature appeared beneath a statement claiming Caleb had received stolen property. "What equipment?" Caleb asked. "A brass marker, some papers. Not here. I'm required to look." "Who signed the order?" Sutter tapped the bottom. The judge's name was printed, not signed. A clerk had scrawled initials beside it. Caleb folded the paper and handed it back. "Come with the judge." Sutter's face colored. "You refusing a lawful search?" "I'm refusing you." The deputy set down his cup. "Vale says you threatened him with a rifle. He fired at my gate. He says the discharge was accidental. The iron remembers it differently." Sutter glanced at the dented triangle. He lowered his voice. "You should think carefully. Vale holds the note on your north pasture." Caleb had not known there was a note. Sutter saw that. Tax lien purchased last winter. Fees added. He can petition for sale. The old fear moved in Caleb's chest, familiar and efficient. Loss arrived first as paper, a line of ink, a fee. A signature made in a room miles away. He looked past Sutter toward the gate. The dark glass token hung beneath the latch. 3 lines and 1 long mark showed fresh in the cedar. Caleb returned his gaze to the deputy. "Then he can petition." Sutter sighed. "Loneliness has made you foolish." "No, loneliness made me easy." The deputy stared at him, then put on his hat. At the gate he paused beneath the turquoise bead. "What's that?" "Something staying." Sutter shook his head and rode south without searching. That evening Caleb opened the cedar chest and removed Ruth's papers. Receipts, the original homestead filing, livestock bills, Emily's school copybook, and a tax statement from the previous winter. He had paid what the statement demanded. At the bottom, in smaller writing, appeared an assessment for unused acreage, marked delinquent after a date that preceded the notice. Vale had bought the delinquency before Caleb knew it existed. The trick was clean, not legal perhaps, but clean enough if Sutter delivered every paper and the clerk misplaced every protest. Caleb lit the lamp and wrote 2 letters. The first went to the district land office. He described the false notice and copied the assessment numbers. The second went to a rancher named Ben Holloway, whose barn Caleb had helped raise 16 years earlier. They had not spoken since the fever winter. Ben had stood outside the mercantile, not inside, but he had not ridden after Caleb either. Caleb wrote only facts. He did not mention Ruth. He did not mention forgiveness. He asked whether Ben still knew the county recorder. At sunrise, he rode to Pine Creek. The town looked smaller than memory. Dust covered the boardwalk. A dog slept beneath the hitching rail. The mercantile door stood open, and for one disorienting second Caleb saw it closed against snow. He dismounted. People recognized him. Their conversations thinned as he passed. He bought stamps, filed a copy of his tax receipt with the clerk, and asked for the record of Vale's lien. The clerk claimed the book was unavailable. Caleb sat on a bench outside the office. "I'll wait." At noon, the book became available. The lien entry carried no witness signature. Caleb copied it anyway. Ben Holloway found him there. He had gone gray and lost 2 fingers from his right hand. "Got your letter," Ben said. "That was quick. Deputy passed my place before breakfast. Mentioned you'd grown troublesome." Caleb folded the copy. "Did you know about the lien?" "No." "Do you still know the recorder?" "I married her sister." That was the first useful thing Caleb had heard all day. Ben looked down the street. Vale has been buying water claims under 3 company names. Folks grumble. Nobody wants to be first to object. Caleb put the paper in his pocket. "I object, I heard." Neither mentioned the winter. Ben rubbed his missing fingers. "I should have ridden after you that night." Caleb looked at the mercantile door. "Yes." Ben swallowed. "I told myself my boys were sick. Told myself I had to keep them safe." Were they? No. The honesty landed between them. Caleb had imagined this conversation many times. In those imaginings, he spoke with perfect coldness or struck Ben hard enough to break teeth. Instead, he felt tired. "My daughter was 7, he said. "I know." "No, you know her age." Ben looked away. Caleb stood. "Help me correct the record." Ben nodded. They entered the office together. The correction did not happen that day. It took statements, copies, fees Caleb could barely afford, and the recorder's reluctant admission that the lien lacked proper notice. Ben signed as witness. 2 other ranchers, seeing someone had gone first, brought their own assessments. By sunset, Vale's 3 company names covered a page. Caleb rode home in darkness. At the gate, he found 3 stones laid in a line. No rider waited. No message hung from the post. The stones were small and pale, placed where wind could not have arranged them. Caleb dismounted and followed the fence north. 50 yards on, cedar bark had been tied low around a branch. Beyond it, a faint track led toward the ridge. They had passed safely. He stood there until the moon rose. The next Sunday he rode to the old valley. He had avoided the place for almost 3 years. The trail descended through ponderosa shade, crossed a creek bed, and opened onto the abandoned edge of his first claim. The cabin was gone. A lightning fire had taken the roof, and winter had finished the walls. Only the stone chimney remained among waist-high grass. Ruth and Emily lay beneath 2 junipers on the slope. Caleb carried a shovel, a rag, and a jar of water. Weeds had grown around the markers. 1 stone leaned where frost had lifted the ground. He worked until both names could be read again. Ruth Ward, Emily Ward. The letters were shallow. He had carved them in frozen rock with hands that would not stop shaking. Caleb sat between the graves and removed the blue-button tin from his coat. At that time, it still held only 1 button, the last he had found beneath Emily's bed after the cabin emptied. He rolled it between thumb and forefinger. "A girl stayed at the ranch," he said. Wind moved through the juniper needles. He told them about the storm, the canteen, the stone, and Naya's suspicion of every door. He described the way she had corrected his knot and divided her bread. He told Ruth about Mara watching a wet-breasted jay and finding water 30 yards from where Caleb had walked for years. When he reached the part about Vale, his voice became harder. "I almost shot him." The creek bed answered with a raven's call. Maybe I wanted it to be him at the window. Maybe I wanted one face to hold all of it. He poured half the jar at Ruth's marker and half at Emily's. The soil darkened, releasing the smell of clay. I don't know what you would have done, he said. I used to pretend I did. He had spent years preserving them as judges because judges could not leave him. Ruth had become perfect in memory, always patient, always brave, never angry that he had failed to bring medicine. Emily had become only laughter and honey, untouched by the ordinary selfishness and noise of a living child. Grief had polished them until no human being could stand beside them. Naya had not stood beside them. She had made room elsewhere. Caleb reset the leaning stone. He packed earth around its base, testing it twice. Before leaving, he placed the single blue button on Emily's marker. Then he changed his mind and put it back in the tin. Not yet, he said. The ride home took 4 hours. Clouds shaded the rim, and for once he did not hurry through the cooler country. At a bend above Pine Creek, he saw the town roofs below, small squares of tin and wood. From that height, the mercantile was indistinguishable from every other building. He understood that he would always remember the locked door. He also understood that he no longer had to live inside it. At dusk, he reached the ranch. The 3 stones still waited by the gate. Caleb carried them to the dry well and set them into the repaired rim, one beside the wren skull, 2 opposite. They looked ordinary there. That was the point. 2 weeks later, a letter came from Fort Apache. It was written by the interpreter whose name appeared on Mara's older claim. Naya was recovering. The papers had been copied and sent to the district judge. Harlan Vale's red knife filing had been suspended pending investigation. Rafe Pike had made a sworn statement in Show Low regarding the burned camp and altered markers. At the bottom, beneath the interpreter's handwriting, a separate line appeared in larger, uneven letters. Rosegood shirt safe. Birdwater? Caleb read it 3 times. He carried the letter to the east seep and sat on a rock beside the new spring box. Water whispered through the pipe. He wrote back on the same day. Birdwater good. Tree thinking about it. Rose misses your knots. He did not know whether the sentence would survive translation. It did not matter. Naya would understand the horse. Summer pressed on. Vale did not return. His deputy came once more, this time without a notice. Sutter asked whether Caleb had spoken to the district investigator. Caleb said yes. Sutter stared at the gate mark, removed his hat, and asked for water. Caleb gave his horse a bucket first. By August, 3 ranchers had challenged Vale's assessments. The county recorder resigned. A federal surveyor visited Red Knife Canyon with Mara, the interpreter, and 2 witnesses who had used the spring long before Vale arrived. No single paper settled the matter. Papers rarely did, but Vale could no longer make the people around the water disappear one at a time. Caleb heard that he sold his house in Pine Creek and went south toward Tucson. He also heard that Pike found work driving freight for a store in Show Low. The gray gelding returned with a new bridle and no blood on the bit. Tied to the saddle was Caleb's old boot, repaired with a patch of red leather. Caleb hung it in the barn. The peach tree produced 1 blossom in early September. It opened white against the gray branch. Caleb found it while carrying grain to the chickens. He stood beneath it with the scoop in his hand, afraid that breathing too hard might make it fall. By afternoon, the petals had begun to curl from heat. The blossom would not become fruit. It had come too late in the season. Still it had come. He carried a chair outside and ate supper beside the tree. When autumn cooled the nights, Caleb roofed the dry well. He did not fill it. He repaired the stone lining, built a proper ladder, and cut vents beneath the cover. Inside he stored blankets, sealed water jars, dried food, and a lantern wrapped in cloth. Anyone trapped by storm, pursuit, or bad luck could survive there for several days. Above the opening he fixed a small wooden sign. No name, no claim. Only the same 3 short lines and the longer line Sani had carved into the gate. He did not know whether he was entitled to copy it. When Mara saw it months later, she touched the mark and said nothing, which Caleb took as permission. They returned in the first cold week of November. Caleb was shoeing Rose when Buck lifted his head and called toward the north ridge. 4 riders emerged through the junipers. Mara led. Sani rode behind her, Lita beside a pack horse. Naya sat on Rose's old blanket pad atop a dark pony and wore Emily's shirt beneath a brown jacket. She had grown no taller, as far as Caleb could tell, but she rode into the yard as if she had never fallen or hidden. Caleb set down the hammer. Naya dismounted before the pony stopped moving completely. She crossed the yard at a run, the slightest stiffness remaining in her right ankle. She did not embrace him. Neither of them knew how. She stopped within arm's reach and held out the shirt. It had been washed, mended at the shoulder, and embroidered around the cuffs with narrow blue stitching. "You said keep it," Caleb reminded her. I said, bring back. That was poor judgment. Naya pushed it against his chest. Caleb accepted. Then she took a tobacco tin from her pocket and opened it. Inside lay 7 blue buttons. He sat down on the anvil block. Naya watched his face. Wrong? Caleb picked up one button. It was not the same shade Emily had collected. Some were navy, some pale, one almost green. All had been chosen and saved. No, he said. Right. Mara looked toward the peach tree. It lived one blossom. Then it remembers how. Sonny inspected the new shelter beneath the well. Lita checked Caleb's remedy jars and threw away the old quinine without asking. They stayed 2 nights. No ceremony marked their return. They repaired tack, traded dried squash for cheese, and helped Caleb extend the spring line to a second trough outside the gate. Travelers could water animals there without entering the yard. Mara said a shared water place needed rules. Caleb painted them on a plank in plain letters. 1 bucket per horse. Let them rest. Close the valve. Leave some for the next. Naya added a 5th rule beneath them in smaller writing. No yellow shirts. Caleb looked at Rose. I told you that in confidence. Naya smiled. The sign remained. Through winter, people began stopping at the outside trough. First shepherds, then freight drivers, then families moving between settlements. Some left coins. Caleb put the coins in a jar and used them for pipe, salt, and oats. Some left nothing. He watered their horses anyway. Once a woman arrived at midnight with a baby burning from fever. Caleb opened the root cellar, boiled water, and used Lita's willow bark while her husband rode for the doctor. The child lived. In spring, a pair of Apache hunters stopped beneath the gate mark. They did not enter until Caleb came outside. One touched the dark glass token and spoke Naya's name. Caleb gave them coffee. They left venison hanging from the porch beam. The ranch was never crowded. Days still passed when Caleb heard only animals and wind. He still ate many meals alone. Grief did not leave because a child survived. Ruth's cup remained on the wall. Emily's buttons stayed in their tin. But solitude ceased to be a locked room. It became a space with a gate. A year after the storm, clouds gathered over the Mogollon Rim. Caleb stood on the porch watching the western sky turn purple. The chickens went under the coop. Buck, older and grayer, waited at the stable door. Wind moved through the sage with the smell of wet stone. A wagon appeared on the southern road. It carried a man, a woman, 2 children, and everything they owned beneath a torn canvas. One wheel wobbled. The smaller child leaned against the woman's shoulder with eyes closed. The driver halted outside the gate and looked at the mark cut into the cedar. Is this Ward's place? He called. Caleb stepped from the porch. It is. We were told there's water. Caleb looked toward the east line. The spring box was covered. The barrel was full. Beyond the ranch, rain began falling in a dark curtain still miles away. There is, he said. He opened the gate. As the wagon rolled in, the first drop struck the iron triangle. It rang once, clear and bright. Another drop darkened the dust beside the dry well. Then another. Caleb stood beneath the rising smell of rain with the polished river stone in his pocket and the turquoise bead moving softly against the cedar latch. Inside the house, 6 bowls waited on the shelf.